coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara. Look, there comes one of them now.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Movie Breakdown, and I am your host, Christopher Spicer, and I remain a big fat liar. You'll remember way back in January, I posted the podcast of my 10 most anticipated movies of 2025, and I promised you it was going to be a glorious kickoff, a glorious relaunch of great stuff that would be happening on the Beyond the Balcony website, and the return of the Movie Breakdown, where I would be going back to the good old days, you know, the 2019s, the 2020, the 2021, the 2022, even 2015, 2014, the days where there would be weekly podcast episodes where we'd be reviewing new releases. And I did confess that Scott wouldn't be there, but I would be here every week. But no, there was neither of us for the rest of January, and for any of February, I disappeared. And there has been stuff on Beyond the Balcony, but it hasn't been movie reviews. It hasn't been the big pop culture deep dives I've promised. And so I apologize for that. So we're going to try to rewind that, and this is going to be my attempt at the relaunch with weekly episodes where I'll be reviewing movies. And as I said, I'll probably be solo for the first few weeks because clearly I need to get my stuff in order. I need to get things organized, and so I don't need to throw in the added craziness of trying to get a guest podcast. Easy for me. You can tell I've been out of this for a little bit, people. Guest podcast hosts, guest hosts on the Movie Breakdown. That is a whole other thing to kind of shuffle, but I am still very interested, and I've had some amazing people reach out saying they'd be interested in being guest hosts. So that is a thing. If Scott's not able to return this year, the guest hosts rotation is a thing that I'm planning on doing. But for the first few weeks, especially since how much I failed in January and February, the first few weeks it's just going to be me solo, and then I will attempt to reach out, get guest hosts. But the goal is to do new release reviews every single week. Lots of 2025 movies already to try to catch up on, and I apologize for that because I haven't delivered as I initially promised. It's been crazy, and I revealed it in the last podcast, but I feel one of my big things as a creator is it's important to be vulnerable and to be honest, with the hope that maybe one of my listeners or one of my readers can resonate with it, and it can speak to them in some way and help them, because in the end I'm hoping that I do get everything together and that success comes my way, and so maybe all these struggles I've had can be an inspiration to others. So I just want to open up a little bit in that, this mental health journey I've been on is taking a little bit longer, and it's been a little bit harder than I wanted to admit. As I had revealed in previous podcasts, I've been diagnosed with being neurodivergent with some ADHD that I've had my whole life, and I was unaware of until now at 47 years old. And as well, I have on the spectrum for autism. So all these fun things that I've been dealing with my whole life that I was unaware of, and is believed through my psychiatrist and my doctor that has likely been a huge trigger for my depression and anxiety that is deep rooted, that is linked to sort of my childhood. So I'm going through cognitive behavioral therapy, trying to work through that. And it's draining. If you're looking at something that isn't going to exhaust you, I do not recommend cognitive behavioral therapy. But if you have things in your life that you're wanting to work through and you're wanting to try to overcome your depression, even though it's going to take a lot of energy and a lot of time, then, it might be worth it. And It's been a lot the last 2 months, but I think it is getting me in the right direction. But it has been energy sapping, especially when a lot of days I don't feel like I have a lot of depression or a lot of energy. Sorry, I have a lot of depression. That's why I don't have a lot of energy. And so CBT's been a lot to throw on top of that. But I am hoping and I am optimistic that it's going to get me in a place where I can be a better creator, but more importantly, a better father, a better husband, a better friend, a better person. That is the end goal here. On top of that, I am, as I've mentioned before, I'm on medication, but it has been just changing on a monthly basis, trying to see what works best. I'm on Prestique for antidepressants, and then my Concerta dosage has been increasing on a monthly basis, and every single time it knocks me. It kind of shakes me up a little bit. It makes me feel nauseous, and so there's a lot of adjusting to that. So that's been fun. While just really trying to come to terms with all this diagnosis stuff, it's been tough. And then on top of that, while trying to figure that all out and low energy, I've been trying to get my career back on track. As I confessed in the last podcast, I have done a lot of self-sabotaging through my depression, and I had a lot of work lined up in the summer, and due to just sort of not responding well to things like the flooding that happened in our basement and other things that had life that were anxiety inducing, I didn't really deliver on maybe some of the deadlines that I should have, and it has led to some working relationships. And at this point, I am starting a few others right now and trying to build that back up, get my career back in place. But it's definitely not in a place where I have the consistent work I need and the work that's really paying me what I need, obviously, to sort of make a living. But I'm getting there, but it's taking a lot of work. It's taking a lot of time. My days are full of a lot of pitching and putting applications together and building back relationships. And so it's meant that I haven't been able to create the podcast and create the articles that I want. And there's a big, massive short story contest that the Toronto Star does every day. Every day, yep, they have a big, giant short story contest every day. Wow, my brain is not my friend today. And I even remembered to take my medication. No, the Toronto Star has an annual short story contest that happens at the end of February every year. And the deadline is in 3 days. And as of this recording, it is, it's actually Wednesday, so it's not necessarily 3 days. I'm recording this on a Saturday, but you will be listening to this on a Monday. And so the deadline is on February 26th at 5 p.m. And at least finally, starting last year, that you could send it by email rather than having to be snail mail with the state of the Canadian Post. That's a good thing. But if you're an Ontario resident, short story contest that is on February 26th is the deadline. And I don't have a completed short story at this point. I have drafts, I have things in place, but I have not committed to it the way I wanted this year. I've got a few days here to possibly try to throw something together and send it out. I really should push myself, even if it's a story that I don't think has any chance of winning. I should send something out just so that I can start sort of having those small wins and completing stuff. That's what this podcast is right here. As I drone on about my life, this is trying to be a small win, saying I've completed something. I have something for people to listen to. The short story would be something for people to read. And hopefully this week, if you pop on Beyond the Balcony, there's going to be some reviews and actual pop culture writing, things for you to read. Maybe it won't be the best stuff in the world, but it is something I have completed. Get myself back in a groove of writing things, recording things, creating things, getting work out there. And because 2025 is still a year where I'm hoping I am going to be successful. I am going to get these things back on track. I am going to get my mental health sort of a balance. Maybe I'm not going to be happy all the time, but getting that balance, feeling I have a sense of control. And that includes creating things again, getting my freelance career back on track. And now that you have just been possibly turned the show off because you're like, well, he does this all the time. Stop being vulnerable. It's boring, is what you might be saying as a listener, and I apologize, or at least I'm getting tired of you stumbling over your words. Maybe you should write out this podcast if you're solo now, instead of just trying to freeform this thing, because my ears hurt. They are bleeding out, and I am sorry. But if you've decided through this craziness that, hey, maybe I want this craziness in my life. I've got a business and I want someone who has this crazy brain that somehow you feel this is going to benefit your business. I've been doing this writing thing since 2010, so I do feel I have something to offer. And if you happen to decide that you want someone to write columns for you or to write creative, narrative-driven style ad copy, do social media for you, do blogs for you, landing pages, company newsletters, depending what it is that your business is, I can offer something creative, imaginative. I can infuse some pop culture in there. And I have written for demographics in the 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. And being 47 years old, maybe my pop culture is going to, the sweet spot, if you listen to this podcast, is probably people who are maybe a bit on the older side or have a little bit of nostalgia. But I can create that stuff for you. And if you are interested, please reach out. My email is christopher.d.spicer@gmail.com. I am going to try to get better at creating that about page that will also be able to, on my site Beyond the Balcony, where you can sort of see some of my portfolio and reach out to me there as well. But that's going to help me be able to create more as if I have steady work. And so if you have sort of, if you potentially know somebody, I guess that's what I was going to say. If you have a connection that you could potentially set me up with, or if you yourself need work, please reach out. I'd love to do that for you. I'm obviously doing my own work. I'm seeking it out, and things are beginning to come together, but I definitely have a lot of open slots for that. Now that I've done all that, I am actually planning on doing a podcast today. And it's not the reviews that I promised in that podcast way back in January. Instead, this podcast is going to be the breakdown of movies made like they used to from the 2020s. And what this podcast is about. Originally, what I was going to do was, I've heard so much, and I have done a show. For those people who remember the last show or look at Beyond the Balcony, I was in Murder on the Orient Express. I performed with Playful Fox in the end of January, beginning of February. I was Michelle, the train conductor. My first murder mystery was a lot of fun. But there was a few performers in that show, and there's many people I've come across the last few years who keep on saying, I don't go to the theater anymore because it's just superhero movies. It's just stuff based off sort of remakes and based off established stuff. There's no original stories anymore. They don't make the movies like they used to. And I'm all bummed out. I've given up. And then I'll mention movies and people will be like, what? I never heard of that movie. I never heard of The Nice Guys. I don't know how many people who complain about the lack of original movies or making the movies they used to like that have not heard of The Nice Guys. And there's a reason why The Nice Guys flopped, starring Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe. Me and Scott, if you'll remember, when that picture came out, we just praised that movie so much. It made most of our best of the year list. We absolutely loved that movie. And I will continue to champion The Nice Guys because there continues to be people who have never seen that movie. And so it would have made our best of list in 2016. Thank you, Google. I can't remember when all these movies came out. But it got me thinking that it would be good to do a show where I look at pictures that are sort of like the movies that we remember from our childhood. If you're my age, at 47 years old, movies that sort of feel like they're from the 90s or the 1980s or the 1970s, those old school movies, because sometimes they do make movies like they used to. It's not just all comic book movies. I was originally going to do a show where it would be movies all from the time that the movie breakdown's been around, since 2013. But I've realized the industry has changed so much that I'm kind of nostalgic now even for pictures from the 2010s. Like, I don't feel like big studios even make movies like The Nice Guys as much. That was 2016, or that the industry from 2013, 2014, that me and Scott were going on about how they just make big budget pictures now. They just make these remakes in comic book movies, that it got a lot worse as the years went on. When we started getting to 2019, or now with 2025, 2024, I feel like studios have taken even less chances when it comes to theatrical movies, especially since there's been so much, the rise of streaming movies and original movies, I think, has really hurt big studios from taking even more chances. They've now decided that certain type of genres, that should just go to streaming. We're not even going to make that anymore for sort of the theatrical experience. I mean, you want an example, something like Prey, which is in the established world of Predator. Disney didn't even want to take a chance on that going out to theaters, and it was just straight to streaming. And so there has been even less of that sort of taking chances in the last few years. It's been even harder sort of to find those movies of what that they made, like they made them like they used to type thing. It's even been harder to find that. So I decided to really shorten the window of pictures I was picking from of this list of movies made like they used to, and I'm just going to do from the 2020s, because like I said, I really think studios have even taken less risks since even the 2010s, which was a time that me and Scott moaned then. But I believe there was a decent selection. I was still able to find several movies. I had a hard time coming down to a list of just 10. And so I think it was worth doing that. And so I did. But before I get right into that list, I just want to say, well, thank you so much for listening to the show. But as well, this podcast is brought to you by Spreaker Prime, the wonderful people at Spreaker Prime. That is our host site. And if you have yourself a podcast where you have over 1,000 downloads, I believe you need at least 1,000 downloads a month, you can join Spreaker Prime. And they are just great. They are there 24/7 to support us, and they have different tools in place. And as this year and the podcast grows, I think I'm really going to try to take advantage of them a lot more. But yeah, you go on Spreaker Prime and you can just see a whole collection of podcasts, whole different types. It's not just movies. They do everything, true crime and cooking and politics, and I don't know how many people want to listen to politics podcasts in 2025. Politics have become crazier than movies. But as well, there is my site Beyond the Balcony. And maybe one day Scott will write on Beyond the Balcony again. Just like maybe one day Scott will be back on this podcast. But for now, the podcast has always been on my site Beyond the Balcony, as well as Spreaker Prime. And one way you can help out this podcast is listening to us directly from the Spreaker app, because ads on the Spreaker app, there's even more sort of revenue from that happens if you do it directly from the Spreaker app. And so that would help me out. And obviously, if you help us out in that way, it then allows me to do more podcasts, and allows me to potentially hire guest hosts and really sort of grow the site and the podcast. So if you enjoy this, if you enjoy me ranting and not doing what was advertised, then support me. And if you don't, then don't support me. Maybe I'll learn my lesson and actually improve the show. But let's get into this now. 10 movies from the 2020s that kind of remind us of the good old days, how movies used to be made. My number 10 is a 2020 movie that there is a chance that a lot of people don't know this picture. I really liked it, and I think it made my best of the year list in 2020, because that is a year where there wasn't a lot of competition, because there wasn't a lot of movies. There was this thing going around called COVID that kept a lot of people home, and for most of the year the movie theaters were closed, but there was a small little window where you actually could go see movies. You had to distance yourself. You had to come see it in a mask, and I think the theater could only be half full or maybe even more, because less than that, there was a social distance. There was a whole deal of going to the theater, and so usually it was me and about 2 other people, but I did see a few movies in the theater, and one of them was Let Him Go. This was directed by Thomas Bazuki, and it stars Diane Lane, Kevin Costner. And what it is you've got a retired sheriff and his wife. They have lost their son, but they are looking after their grandson. But then they lose their grandson. Their grandson has now been taken over by the family of what would be their daughter-in-law. They took away the son, and we realize that this is this family that's kind of this criminal family, this family that lives out in the mountains, and they have criminal activities. And so this retired sheriff and his wife set out to save their son. It is a family drama. Diane Lane, Kevin Costner have some chances to really show their acting power here. But this is also a thriller as the story unfolds. It's trying to learning more about this family, and they have to go to sort of each member and finally getting to the house where their grandson has been abducted, and they find out this matriarch that's running this family, just this absolutely crazy, dangerous woman played by Leslie Manville in an absolutely fantastic performance. I think all the performances here are really great. The family here, the Dark family, is the Weebos. And I believe Kaylee Carter is the daughter-in-law, and she doesn't have a huge part in here, but she's still an important character. And I think this is just a really fantastic picture here as they seek out to like I said, save their grandson. And this is a mix of sort of psychological thriller with definitely feels of sort of a Western, kind of that modern Western. And that was the thing that sort of started coming back a bit. There's definitely been some series recently that kind of have that touch of that modern Western. And this is a picture that sort of has that feel. It definitely feels it's in the Midwest. And there is a really big bloody climax. And I think the climax goes a little over the top. That was the one part of the picture that lost me a little bit. But I care about these characters. I love going on this journey. I love the twists and turns. And when it is focused on the characters, it is a really engaging and fascinating movie. And it feels like that old school thriller. It feels like something that would have been made in the 70s. And if you feel it doesn't necessarily have that pedigree, a decade that sort of made some of the best psychological thrillers, it would definitely be sort of a great early 90s picture that would still star Kevin Costner and Diane Lane. But here they just get to play a little bit older. They bring that maturity. It did come to theaters. I don't think a lot of people saw it, but to be fair, there probably was a lot of theaters that were full, and there's a lot of people that weren't daring to come out in November of 2020. And so there's a good chance you haven't seen this movie. And if you love sort of that old school violent drama thriller, this is a great movie. And like I said, the ending is going to connect with some people. It's not going to connect with everyone. It's a little over the top, but I cared about the characters enough that I accepted it. I was like, I don't know how you're going to end this thing. They decided they were going to end the picture this way, and it is, it's a really great kind of old school psychological thriller style movie, and that is Let Him Go. I didn't necessarily rank these movies per se, but my ninth movie here is a much more recent movie. It came out last year, and I also saw it in theaters. And it actually is based off an intellectual property, which is something we get a lot of, but it really wasn't that concerned in this old 1980s series called The Fall Guy, to the point that I think most people who saw The Fall Guy isn't even aware that it was based off a TV series. I was, but I didn't even watch the TV series. And from what I heard, it barely is interested in following that. What this is instead is an action comedy, an action romantic comedy, which is definitely not a super common thing, though one of my all-time favorite movies is Romancing the Stone from 1984, which is very much sort of an adventure that's also sort of a romantic comedy. Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, I think, have great chemistry. I love them as a couple. I think they have great scenes here. I think Ryan Gosling is a gem. I just love how the fact that he is not concerned about making himself cool here. He's allowed to make himself ugly cry. He's allowed to make himself very much missing Emily Blunt and wanting to win her back. But then he also has to figure out what's happened to the movie star of this movie they're putting together. He's got to try to find him. And so we've got ourselves a mystery here. Aaron Taylor Johnson's playing a very much over-the-top, pretentious movie star, and he's loving every minute of it. This is definitely one of his better performances. This is a picture that's got a lot of funny moments, and this just feels like something that would have been a fantastic movie from the 1980s, because I think a lot of people forget that a lot of 1980s movies had a lot of comedy in them. I know, like, you've got Sylvester Stallone, who did cheesy movies where he was super serious, but Arnold Schwarzenegger, with all his one-liners, and you got stuff like Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, there's quite a bit of comedy in it. And so I think this movie expertly put that together, blending the comedy with action. But the other thing that makes this very much feel like the movie from another time is just the stunts. It obviously has some CGI, but there's a lot of real stunts. And this is very much a love letter to stunts and practical effects and great set pieces. This picture unfortunately suffers from a lot of modern movies in that I think it's a lot longer than it needs to be. There was a part where I feel like, oh, we're wrapping up, and then there's a whole other act that got tacked on. But I'm also happy because that final act has some of the best practical effects and great stunts, and it is a very fun movie. I think the reveal was a little disappointing for me. So again, sort of like Let Him Go, where it didn't necessarily nail the landing, but the journey there was fantastic. I thought Gosling and Blunt, like I said, I really loved them together. I wanted to see them hook up, and that's what you want in a romantic comedy. Teresa Palmer plays sort of the crazy girlfriend of Aaron Taylor Johnson, and she is fantastic here. Winston Duke is a friend of Ryan Gosling. He's a guy who's always a standout in every movie he's in. Stephanie Hugh is a lot of fun in this picture as well. Hannah Waddington sort of as the crazy kind of agent of the Tom Ryder character who Johnson plays. She's wonderful. She's over the top. Everyone seems to be having fun with their characters. And this is another one where it didn't do great in the box office. You don't blame this on COVID. I think you just blame this on maybe the marketing, and probably also just the budget was a little big for me, the type of movie it was. But check this out. I think Fall Guy, if you're another one where you're like, they don't make movies like they used to. And I mean, Let Him Go is one where it's more of a darker, gritty, psychological thriller, if you like that. This one is if you just want a feel-good action picture, just something that is fun, and you love the characters, and you go on a great ride, that is The Fall Guy. They do make fun 1980s style action pictures still, and that would be The Fall Guy. And it would even be better if it was closer to 90 minutes instead of over 2 hours. But that's how you know it's a 2024 movie or a modern movie. is we just feel like we got to make the movies over 2 hours. My next picture is another 2020 movie. It's not a theatrical movie. And I was kind of hinting at the fact that streaming is what's changed certain genres. And so it may be kind of odd then that I'm putting in a streaming movie here. But my issue with a lot of streaming movies is they're made to sort of fold laundry to. That they're not really that interested in you paying attention to them. They don't really feel like theatrical experiences. They just feel like very generic pictures that after you watch them, you completely forget them. And so the only way a streaming movie was going to get on this list is if it felt like this would fit perfectly in the theater. It feels like a theatrical experience. And Enola Holmes definitely feels like what were the type of children movies I remember watching in the 1980s. Sort of that. Nowadays, a children movie is almost always like Pixar or DreamWorks. It is often an animated movie. There is not a lot of sort of live action pictures that are focused on being an adventure for kids. Instead, now you've got sort of the MCU, you've got the Star Wars, you've got those type of pictures that the kids then go, but those pictures are also being made for, the adults, and they're being made for sort of people that are in their 20s and 30s, but they still make the toys and the merchandise for the young kids. But there isn't those movies that are sort of those adventures that also feel like they would work for a younger audience. Now, I get Enola Holmes is PG-13, and so in some ways, maybe this isn't quite fitting the way that I want here, because maybe it's a bit darker than something right for the kids. But you look at 1980s kid movies, and they're all kind of pretty dark too. But in the 80s, you had stuff like The Goonies, and you had stuff like The Adventure of Natty Gann, and obviously, E.T., one of the big classics. And these were live action movies. They weren't animated. They were live action movies that were trying to be an adventure that kids could attach to. The hero was them. They would go on that adventure with them. There's also stuff like The Explorer and The Last Navigator, The Last Starfighter, though that one, he's a little bit older. And Enola Holmes just feels like it captured that vibe. It's maybe not quite The Goonies, maybe more sort of The Adventures of Natty Gann, because this one is also a period piece. Enola Holmes, it's based off a book series, but it is the younger sister of Sherlock Holmes. She's played by Millie Bobby Brown. And I know Millie Bobby Brown is kind of showing up in everything. And I feel like when people start showing up in a lot of things, there ends up being a backlash. And I know also Millie Bobby Brown dared to say that she's done with Stranger Things and she wants to try new things. And I guess that also got backlash. But people are silly. Millie Bobby Brown, I think, is just a wonderful actor. I think she's got charisma, a great screen presence. And everything I've seen, she seems like a wonderful person. And how dare her wanting to do new things other than Stranger Things. But anyways, I'm sure she's appreciative of that. I'm just talking about some of the silly people on social media that just seem to be angry about everything. And I just think Enola Holmes is a wonderful movie. The moment I saw this in 2020, I did sort of decide that maybe Danica is a little bit too young to see in 2020, but I wanted her to see this movie because it's great to see a strong female character, a smart female character. This is a really fun adventure she goes on as she unravels a conspiracy theory. I thought the set designs were great. It feels like something from sort of the 1800s. Great set pieces, great costumes. Henry Cavill plays Sherlock Holmes, which I never thought would be a thing that would work, but I like him here. I think he also is very charismatic. You've also got the other Holmes brother here. You've got Helena Bonham Carter, who is just always great in everything she's in. She's absolutely wonderful. I love the twist. I love the turns. And even though I sort of was like, oh, this is PG-13, I largely think younger kids could see this. Just watch it with them. There's a few scary parts, but for the most part, this is a great kids' adventure. And they just don't make a lot of movies like this. Live action kid adventure movies that were very plentiful in the 1980s. And so that's why this is on the list. Another one that I remember, but it didn't come out in the 2020s, I think it was 2019, was The Kid Who Would Be King. They took Everett to the theater and he absolutely loved it. Where there is sort of Merlin who then he comes back for the older times because it's a modern take on sort of the King Arthur story. There's a boy who takes out Excalibur, and you have Merlin who takes the form of a teenager, and he's trying to get his magic back and these tricks that he does. And I remember Everett trying to do all these magic tricks at home. That's one of the things that got him into the magic. He loved that movie for the longest time. And so that is one sort of movie that also feels like something that we got a lot more in the 1980s. And I just think Enola Holmes perfectly captures it. It's got that edge. It's got that adventure. It's something a kid could connect to. There's also a sequel. I think they're going to make another one. Millie Bobby Joe Brown is great. Enola Holmes is definitely worth tracking down. And if you have Netflix, you could watch it this afternoon with your kids. Well, maybe not because you're probably at work because this is a Monday, but you can see it tonight. Or if you don't let kids watch movies during the week, you can schedule it in for Friday. All right? Schedule it in for Friday. We're now going to move to a dad movie. This is a 2023 movie, another one that I got to see in the theater. And it's a picture that really, these things, don't come to the theater too often anymore. But this is Air. And it is the story about how they got about getting Michael Jordan to sign a deal with Nike. This is back when Nike was known more for appealing to joggers, to runners, and they wanted to break out into the basketball market. But that's something that Converse had a foothold on. And Nike was not able to get a big star to endorse their shoes. And this is before Michael Jordan became one of the most famous basketball players of all time. He's just coming out of college, but you've got this agent, this person who works with Nike, who feels like Michael Jordan's going to be the future and he should sign him, and that it's going to revolutionize the industry and it's going to make Nike a household name. And we know how that all ends up. But this is a really fun movie. It is that docudrama. It is a period piece. It is kind of that dad movie where you get great performances and interesting characters. And I mean, there's a lot of kind of male performers here, but it's that nice mix of drama and comedy. It's just that wonderful movie you can watch sort of in the Sunday afternoon. I really, really like Air, probably because I'm in my 40s and I am a dad, so it's my demographic. But you've also just got unbelievable performances here. Matt Damon's in the lead role. You've got Ben Affleck kind of playing the eccentric owner of Nike. Chris Messina, a very memorable performance as an agent. Jason Bateman as one of the employees of Matt Damon. Chris Tucker as well. Another great performance from him. Not playing sort of 90s Chris Tucker. Definitely a grounded but powerful performance. And then, of course, the standout performance here is Viola Davis. And so I think it's fitting that in this dad movie it's the woman who has the best performance, but she plays the mother of Michael Jordan. You never see Michael Jordan here. It says Damian Delano Young plays him, but all you get sort of is the back of Michael Jordan. They never really, he's not a crucial player here. The negotiations are with Viola Davis. Also, Julius Tendon plays the father, James Jordan. I think they're just fantastic as the parents. She's got some great moments here, some great sort of award-winning caliber performance, but not super over the top. It's not chewing scenery, but you really get the fierceness and the protection of this mother. She is here to protect her son. She's in for his best interest. Why would I go with this small company here that's going to be a failure. Why don't I go with Converse? And they say, because your son's going to be the face of our company. And I just think, I mean, you know the spoilers, you know how this turns out, but this just feels like what would have been blockbuster dramas of the 1980s. There was a time where, you know, Rain Man was the highest grossing movie of 1988. There was a time where these dramas were the big pictures of the year. Golden Pond was one of the highest grossing movies when it came out in, I think, 1980. There was a time that was stuff that drew out audiences, and that's what this feels like. This feels like a blockbuster drama. Big stars, awesome costumes. It looks like a big budget picture. It probably wasn't like a huge budget compared to sort of a Marvel movie, but it feels like something you should see in the theater. It felt like an event picture. And I really, really liked Air. I don't think it made back its budget. It ended up not necessarily being a big hit in the theaters. And when people say, they don't make movies like they used to, these are the movies you gotta support. If you want more of these kind of movies, you gotta go out and see them. You gotta pay the monies, people. And so track down Air. It's fantastic. I believe this was made in conjunction with Apple. So if you have Apple TV, it is going to be easy for you to see. I really hope, though, it's also available to rent, because, I mean, the only way you really encourage people to make these movies, to make studios make these movies, is they got to make money off them. It's directed by Ben Affleck. I'm a big fan of Ben Affleck, the director. I'm a big fan of Ben Affleck, the actor. He's fantastic in this, but he's a fantastic director. Air is a great movie. Like I said, it feels like back when Amadeus, or even like Braveheart, which I know is more of an action movie, but still, like these kind of movies that are going for an Oscar, but they also feel like a big blockbuster event movie. That was a thing they used to do, and I think Air delivers that. I love this picture. Another thing the 1980s used to do was just crazy, odd movies. Movies that are willing to kind of go in weird directions or a little bit unpredictable. Do some insane stuff halfway through. 1980s were great for that. You're the Hunter of the Future. I saw that in theaters, where it's a caveman going against people shooting laser beams. And to me, Barbarian, which came out in 2022, a horror picture, does that. But you also have to give credit to the marketing team here, because the trailer doesn't spoil what happens here. You have a lady who goes to Airbnb. She's using it because she has a business meeting the next day. And when she arrives at the Airbnb, she realizes they've been double booked. That there is a guy that's already at the Airbnb. And he's kind of acting a little weird. And he's played by Bill Skarsgård, who you know as Pennywise. And he was in Nosferatu. So you're like, well, Bill Skarsgård often plays villains. So he's something about Bill Skarsgård is wrong here. What's he doing here? He's going to be dangerous for poor Georgina Campbell here, who's the star who plays this picture. But the movie takes a twist. And so I don't really want to spoil it too much. I think a lot of people have seen this picture. If you're in Canada, you can see it on Disney Plus. If you like kind of gory horror pictures and psychological thrillers, stuff that sort of takes some dark turns. But what I love of it is it takes a turn that you're not predicting. And it is kind of an insane, crazy turn. And it just made this movie so fun. And it's got some scary moments. It's unsettling. Georgina Campbell's great here. There is plot holes. I had a friend that I recommended this to, and he's like, there's a few things here that don't make sense. And yeah, fine. But it's still fun. And it's different. And so I feel the energy and the pacing and sort of some of the interesting characters here is enough to excuse maybe that logistically all this stuff doesn't quite work, of how sort of what ends up being the villain completely works here. I also like how sort of the villain changes. You start questioning who the villain here. This is a picture that is not scared in tackling some themes. I think great horror movies do tackle social issues, and that happens here. And I think you could even call this a feminist picture. But one that I feel people who just like old school horror movies will still like it and not go, this is woke, because people who call things woke are lame anyways. But this movie is not. This is a fantastic movie, and it has something to say, but I think Georgia Campbell really delivers in a performance here. Bill Skarsgård is great in his part. Justin Long comes in a little bit later, and he just plays one of the most sleazy human beings, and he goes all in on it. I think there's some great makeup design, some great creature design. Barbarian. Check it out. I think if you love horror movies, you're okay with some gore, you're okay with being freaked out a little bit, you got to check out Barbarian. When she goes down in that basement and opens that door, you are like, don't go in there. Don't go down that hallway. Bad things are going to happen. And bad things do happen. But it is a fantastic picture. I really enjoyed Barbarian. And if you want a movie that's kind of telling you movies like they don't make anymore, well, one thing that helps you, kind of makes you be reminded of the old times, is you take a movie that came out in 2024, but it's set in the 1980s and is neon soaked and is just dripping with the feels of the 1980s because it's got bodybuilders in it. That's a really 1980s thing. And health clubs and big poofy 80s hair. I'm talking about Love Lies Bleeding. A picture that came to Brantford for one whole week. And so a lot of people that probably would have appreciated this movie didn't get to see it because they just didn't keep it in the theater long enough. But this is just a fantastic picture directed by Rose Glass. It reminds me of something like a Blood Simple, like one of Coen Brothers' first movies. Sort of those thrillers from the 1980s that are neon soaked but also dark. The most of it happens at night. Pictures that aren't afraid to have some really vile, ugly characters in here. Just awful human beings. A movie that's not afraid to be really violent, but also just have these twists and turns and are full of very complicated characters. There isn't that redeeming hero in here. So really, you might even go back to the very 1970-ish, and it's got that neo-noir feel to it. Kristen Stewart's been awesome for years. I mean, it's time to move past Twilight, right? She has been in great movies ever since, and she is awesome in the star role here. And then you also have a great role from Katie O'Brien, who is the love interest of Kristen Stewart. So that'd be one thing that would make it maybe not so much feel like an actual movie from the 80s, because it probably would have been more exploitative of it being like a lesbian relationship, or it'd be more cliche. And this is one that just kind of treats it as a straight romance. The fact that she is in same sex is not a big deal. And so that probably makes it a bit more progressive in that way. This also, like, I mean, the 80s, when you had stuff like Fatal Instinct, and there was a lot of neo-noir sexualized pictures, kind of these sexualized thrillers. That was like Against All Odds and Sea of Love, those type of movies that were very common in the 80s. That's another thing here. This is definitely a thriller. It's a crime picture. It's a neo-noir, but there's also a romance. But it's an erotic thriller, which is a thing that we've become so Puritan that there isn't a lot of those erotic thrillers anymore. This very much has that. There is nudity here. This is one that these are sexual beings. And so it makes it really stand out in sort of the current landscape. And I think Katie O'Brien is really great here as Jackie, as the person who wants to be a successful bodybuilder, but's got a temper and makes some mistakes. Kristen Stewart, Lou, who's attached to just one of the sleaziest families. Like her dad, Ed Harris, he's a crime guy. He's just an awful human being. And Ed Harris just revels in awfulness. Speaking of awfulness, JJ, played by Dave Franco. Dave Franco just plays a fantastic, miserable human being. And people who don't like Dave Franco, you'll like the direction his character goes. And you have Daisy, who's played by Era Baryshnikov, who's sort of a former lover of Kristen Stewart. She's drugged out and she's not scared to look ugly here. And this is a picture that, it's got great performances across the board here. You've got some fantastic stuff. Jenna Malone needs to be praised here. She is the sister of Lou, who's played by Kristen Stewart. And she's in the relationship with the horrible human being JJ, which kind of gets things spiraling. The response to what they do to JJ kind of sets up the crime and all the things here. Jenna Malone, Beth, her character, is an abusive relationship. And so this is a picture I was willing to talk about things and deal with tough issues, but it's just a great erotic psychological thriller. Love Lies Bleeding, which I also have to say it's another one where the ending, you're either going to love it or it's going to fall a little flat. It fell a little flat for me. I got to rewatch it now that I know how this picture ends, and maybe the ending won't bother me as much as it did the first time. But this is another movie where it is absolutely great until it comes to the ending. And I think I'm beginning to come to terms with what they're trying to do there. And this is a movie that has surreal elements. The ending goes all surreal, which I guess to me felt like a cop-out. But now that I recognize sort of that was a thing that kind of went throughout the picture with its dream sequences and stuff, that maybe I'm willing to be a little bit more forgiving at the end. It's still a movie you got to check. Love Lies Bleeding, 2024. And it definitely feels like something that was made 40 years ago, because erotic thrillers are just not really a thing anymore. Our next picture, we're going to go to 2021. And this is a movie that I believe flopped quite a bit in the box office. And that is sad, because this is just the definition of something that rarely comes into theater anymore. And if they're going to make something like this now, it's going to be a streaming series. And I'm okay with streaming series, but I miss the old school pictures. And this is another psychological thriller, drama, crime picture, but almost gothic. It comes from the great Guillermo del Toro, and I have talked to several people who say this is one of their favorite movies in the last few years. So if you haven't seen it, come and see it. And you're like, Chris, stop dragging it out. What's the movie? It's Nightmare Alley. Nightmare Alley, I was blessed in seeing this in theater. It came out around Christmas time, which is a really hard time, I think, to sometimes see movies. Because one, so many movies come out during Christmas time. And two, a lot's happening during Christmas time. You're busy. You've got a lot of family functions to go to. So you only have so many movies to check off. And so I get it. I think it's a very competitive time. So this might have been something that they should have maybe put it out in January or maybe a little bit earlier. Who knows what hurt it. But I just feel this is just a fantastic, fantastic movie. It's basically about a grifter, someone who's looking for work, and he connects with this carnival, and there's some dark things happening. There's some mysterious things happening in this carnival. There's a dark plan, and the way this unfolds, this character study, what happens, I just think is absolutely wonderful. It's got a fantastic ending, and I just love the visuals of this movie. This is something set in the early 1900s when the carnivals were a big thing, and I love the feel and the look of this dark carnival, this underbelly of this world. And I think there is amazing set pieces, amazing visuals, a great mix of practical with CGI. Guillermo del Toro is one of the best at making these dark fairy tale like movies, and that's what this really is. It's got that feel, that fairy tale. It's got that feel of fantasy, but set in the real world. And then you've just got a powerhouse cast here. Bradley Cooper is the grifter. He's in the lead role that gets trapped in this world. You've got Kate Blanchett, sort of a femme fatale. Toni Collette is in this as well as Xena the Seer. She's the person who sort of sees the future of Bradley Cooper. Willem Dafoe is in this picture. Rooney Mara. Richard Jenkins, of course, is going to be in a Guillermo del Toro movie. Mary Steinberg. Ron Perlman, of course, has to be in a Guillermo del Toro movie. Everyone delivers in this. Plays some really interesting characters. Clifton Collins Jr. as Funhouse Jack plays another memorable performance. I have not seen this movie in a long time. I haven't seen it since I saw it in the theater in 2021. What I know is I need to correct that and re-see this and maybe do a full-on review of this. This is movies that they don't make anymore. Just this ambitious, gorgeous, sweeping picture, 2.5 hours. It's kind of like, I mentioned Amadeus already. I love Amadeus because just the amazing set pieces and how much it immerses you in the world of Mozart and that time period, and just the gaudiness and the over the topness and the lavishness of that world. And this is kind of the reverse on that. This is the darkness and the dirtiness, but it really immerses you in the world. There was just a time where Hollywood was really good at immersing you in these worlds and just letting you sit there for a few hours and just really just love the set pieces and the designs and just see something that you would never really be able to experience, really get to be with this character and get to know this distinct character. Sort of, I've said before, how movies are empathy machines, being able to understand the life of a character that you would never actually live his life, but now you get to understand it a bit. You get to be there for a while, and that's what Nightmare Alley is. It's got some great twists and turns. It is a psychological thriller, but not one where it's sort of this big solving mystery. It's very dramatic, and it takes its time, and it lets you really get immersed in it. Nightmare Alley, they haven't made anything like this since, that's for sure. If you haven't seen it yet, you need to see it. If you have seen it, but it's been a while, be like me and revisit it. It is a fantastic picture. And Guillermo del Toro is a fantastic movie, or a fantastic director. He knows how to make fantastic movies. I probably like Nightmare Alley more than Shape of the Water, but that is another fantastic movie as well. This just did not get the love that it deserved. That is for sure. Now we're going to move on to another movie from 2021 that is, again, another movie that did not get the love that it deserved. This is Last Duel. And I really love this movie. And Last Duel completely flopped in the box office. It was really annoying because, like, the Academy Awards and talk shows kind of, they took they basically made fun of this movie for failing the box office, and what they really should be doing is champion it, because it's another 2.5 hour epic made by an amazing director, Ridley Scott. This is one of the best movies Ridley Scott has made in sort of the twilight of his career. Not every movie he's made in the last 20 years has been a massive hit, but this is probably one of the best. And you've got Nicole Holofcener, who is a great screenwriter, and she was one of the writers of this picture, along with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon are also in this. Matt Damon is kind of in the lead role. Ben Affleck plays a very over-the-top, peculiar character. Then Adam Driver is the rival of Adam Driver is the rival of the Matt Damon character, and then Matt Damon's wife is Jodie Comer, and Jodie Comer is actually fantastic in this. And really, I would say, as the movie unfolds, this is Jodie Comer's story. This picture, in case you haven't seen it, and you probably haven't, because again, it was a big, massive flop. It is sort of taking the Rashomon approach, where you see the movie from 3 different perspectives. It's one story that's then told 3 times. You see it from Jodie Comer's perspective, you see it from Adam Driver's perspective, you see it from Matt Damon's perspective. So obviously when you have that Matt Damon story, he's a heroic hero and he is this valiant figure. And that Adam Driver is just this despicable creature. And then you see it from Adam Driver's perspective, which then changes things and makes you sort of see how he perceived things and how Matt Damon actually is, and or how Matt Damon actually is in his eyes. And then Jodie Comer throws everything out as you see these 2 men are not maybe as heroic or great as you would think. And this is set during the time of knights and medieval. And so women were rarely given a voice. And so obviously the Jodie Comer perspective, I feel in a lot of ways is how you're supposed to see, like this is probably how it really was done, because a woman's voice is rarely seen, and you see how cowardly and awful maybe both these men are. And so you could see this as a feminist picture again, but it's a great story. And again, I mean, if you're one person that says, I don't like that woke stuff, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Like, by this point, you should know where I stand. I am progressive, but I don't even think that politics should wreck this movie. This is just a really well told story. It's an engaging story. And then you get the finale of how things really end. The duel, the last duel, the big kind of clash that finally happens that they're building towards. Ben Affleck plays something so different here, almost a androgynous type character, and I think he does it really well here. I love the set pieces. This is another one that feels like what would have been a big, massive blockbuster in the 1980s, this big medieval epic, back when people came to see movies that had stars attached and big set pieces, and we're okay to come and spend your money on an adult movie. This is a movie geared towards adults, and unfortunately this reaffirms in a lot of studios that, you can't make these kind of movies anymore because people don't come see costume dramas anymore and big historical epics. And that's sad, because this is definitely one of the best historical epics I've seen, not just in the 2020s, but anytime. The Last Duel, it's twisty, it's engaging, it's well written. It's got some great action sequences in it too. I really, really liked this movie. If you haven't seen Last Duel, this is another one you need to check out. But this is not a list that's necessarily about just flops or movies that people didn't see. So my next one is Top Gun Maverick, which probably all of you have seen. And it was a big, big, massive hit. But Top Gun Maverick has to be on here, because as me and Scott talked about many times on this podcast, I don't think it being a sequel to Top Gun is the reason why it was such a big hit when it came out in 2022. I think it was such a big hit. It got the marketing, and people knew about this movie and then had the opportunity to get a ticket because they are aware it's in theater, because it was Top Gun, because it was from a very popular movie from the 1980s and a movie that a lot of people my age have a lot of nostalgia for. I think that is what gave it its good opening weekend and allowed it to have a lot of marketing, have all these featurettes that were dropped online and making ofs. And I think that was the reason why the studio was willing to put money in it to promote this movie. But I believe it became this big, massive hit that had big, massive legs that stayed in the theater the entire summer, was because this delivered something that people were starving for. This is the blockbusters they used to make of the 1980s. This is what a blockbuster used to be. It doesn't have to be superhero centered. It doesn't have to be a remake. It doesn't have to be sky beams and massive CGI. This is a picture where the actors actually had to go through training, that the actors actually went into the planes. This is a picture where they actually shot real planes and did real stunts, something I thought they would never do again. I remember when me and Scott reviewed Top Gun, we said this movie couldn't be made today because they wouldn't be able to jump through the legal hoops to make something like this. They wouldn't risk it. But of course, Tom Cruise is all about the practical and doing the stunts and being insane. And so you knew if he was going to do Top Gun Maverick, he wanted to do it right. And I think this is just amazingly directed by Joseph Krasinski, who I've always appreciated as a visual director. And I think he is great with doing sort of special effects that even if they are CGI, they look real. And in this one, there was a lot of practical stuff. And so that's what makes this really stand out. But on top of that, it just delivers a lot of the things that you don't see in blockbusters anymore. Yeah, there is the practical effects, but this is also a movie that's very earnest. I feel nowadays you've got the Marvel sense of humor. You have to have... Nowadays, so many blockbusters don't want to actually deal with emotions. They're scared that emotions will scare people away and stop them from having fun. And so there's a lack of earnestness. Everything has to be sort of sarcastic or self-deprecating, or any emotional moment has to be followed by a joke. And I felt Top Gun Maverick, what made it stand out is it's very earnest. It's not scared about the Tom Cruise character, Maverick, dealing with the emotions of still sort of coming to terms with losing his friend and coming to terms with the fact of, as he sabotaged the career of Rooster, played by Miles Teller, who is the son of Goose, and having an actual emotional moment with Val Kilmer's character Iceman, who's dying. They didn't have to fall. There's obviously jokes in here, and there's energy, and there's action sequences. It is a fun movie. But what I appreciate about this picture and then Avatar, which came out, I think, the same year, is both of them actually have the earnestness that existed in older movies. These movies that are allowed to allow you to sit in emotions for a little bit and allow us to actually deal with things rather than say, oh, we got to get to the next sequence. And so that's a big thing that made this picture stand out. There's also a romance here, which I feel... I mean, maybe the 80s and 90s so many times had to shoehorn in like a love interest or whatever, but this is a picture that sort of... We deal with love so little nowadays in pictures that it's refreshing when there actually is kind of a love interest that means something to the plot. And so I love seeing Jennifer Connelly here. She is a wonderful actor. I love anytime that Jennifer Connelly's in a movie. And she here is Penny Benjamin, and you actually get to have an actual kind of love plot, an actual relationship with Tom Cruise that I thought worked and felt like just an added layer to something that you don't see as much. And I liked the relationship between Cruise and Teller, and him trying to sort of be that de facto father figure and the responsibility he thinks he has for him and to protect him and the friction between him. I mean, now that I'm a dad, I'm a sucker for sort of that father-child relationship. And even though it's not a real child, he has sort of felt an obligation to care for him. I like the fact that they do a Star Wars at the end with the villain, and they gotta shoot something into a port and make it explode. I think the final act is some great action pieces, set pieces, some great thrills, great energy here. I liked all the sort of supporting cast. Glenn Powell, little did we know that we'd see a lot of him after. I think he is really good in here as well as sort of the new Iceman. This time Hangman. This is one that was a hit. And you probably have seen it, but you can rewatch it. And I think this is a great movie to point to, saying, if you do blockbusters like you used to, people will come. People are starving for something different, something exciting, something thrilling. That was Top Gun Maverick, a movie that really felt like an old school blockbuster. And I think that was why it was a big hit. And we are going to end with a movie that made my number one for best movie of 2021, West Side Story, Steven Spielberg's only musical he ever made. And you're wondering why is this on the list, Christopher? Why did you put a movie like West Side Story on here? It's a remake. It's a well-known movie. What's your purpose? Well, we do get musicals. We get a decent amount of musicals, and sometimes they're hits and sometimes they're not. But I put West Side Story on here because, one, I love it, and I think it's an absolutely amazing story, and I saw this in the theater with my wife Emily, and I just thought this was a fantastically done picture. But I put it on this list because West Side Story, the original movie, also was during the height of musicals, or musicals were blockbusters. And I feel the musicals that were made in the 50s and 60s are very different than the musicals that are made today. And West Side Story felt like a throwback to the old school musical. Ones where things could just stop and you have your big dance number. It seemed to have the energy of the old school musical. And it helps that it is an older musical, a golden age musical, so it's got the golden age songs. And I felt this was a movie that did not try to popify, didn't try to modernize this. It set it in like the 1950s. It set it during that period still. And when the movie obviously came out, the original, it was sort of a modern take on Romeo and Juliet. And now that they kept this in the 1950s, it's now sort of a period piece picture. But I really love that. I love the fact that Spielberg did not shy away of making this feel like a 1950s movie. It feels like it could have almost been even shot during that period. The colors they use, the visual style they use, the set pieces they use, it feels very much of the time, of the 1950s. It felt like a 1950s picture, and so that made it successful in being sort of feeling like a 1950s musical. It's got the songs that feel of the time period. It did the dance that way, the nice bright colors, the energy. I just thought there's just not many musicals recently that I feel that's up to this caliber. One that felt unashamed. I am a musical. I'm going to be a musical. I'm going to go all in. I love the story of West Side Story. Obviously, it's like Romeo and Juliet, but I think they delivered on that. Ansel Elgort, who I guess has now become a bit of a controversial person, and there's some things that maybe he turned out maybe not to be the best person. He is good in this picture. Aria DeBose, who sadly has been a lot of flops since this picture, she deserved the supporting Actors Academy Award that she got. Rachel Ziegler, another person that I guess people haven't decided that they love all the time because of what she said about Snow White, I think is absolutely fantastic in here. I think you've got great performances across the board. The dancing is great. The set pieces are great. I think the West Side Story remake is fantastic. It's one of Steven Spielberg's best movies. And I'm not just saying of modern Spielberg. I would put it... Spielberg's made a lot of classics. And I would definitely put it in the top 10 of one of his best movies. Rather high. I mean, it's not surpassing Jaws. It's not surpassing E.T. or Raiders of the Lost Ark. Or Close Encounters of the Third Kind and that type of stuff, but it's on there. I think this is a fantastic movie. It was one of my favorite movies of 2021, and I wish it was a bigger hit. And I do like the fact that we still get musicals, but this just felt like it had that old school musical feel. It felt like a big musical blockbuster. If you haven't seen West Side Story and you like movie musicals, you can't go wrong with this one. And so there you go. I've listed 10 movies. And somehow I pulled off recorded another solo show where I talked for a very long time. But hopefully you enjoyed it. I gave you a list of 10 movies to check out. Movies that I feel like when you moan saying they don't make them like they used to. Well, here are 10 movies that came out in the 2020s that I feel very much have a lot of elements of the stuff that made us love movies, that turned us into movie buffs in the 80s, or if you're older than me, the 90s, or if you're older than me, the 90s. Good job. My brain works well. 70s is what I meant to say. If you're older than me, you might remember growing up and seeing movies in the 70s, or when it comes to musicals, 60s, 50s. And then if you're younger than me, 90s. But I was growing up still in the 90s. I was a teenager. And then maybe even the 2000s, but I can't really think what movie here would really fit as a 2000s movie. I was thinking about putting in a raunchy comedy, and then I didn't. So there you go. These are the 10 movies that I chose, and I really appreciate you listening to me this week. Blabber on all by myself. I've got a question of the week for you, though. I'm going to deliver that right now, and that is, what true story, what true event would make a great blockbuster movie? So a true event that has not been turned into a movie yet. One that you look back and you're like, that would really make for an engaging movie. You can pick a documentary. I'm not counting a documentary as a movie here, because the reason I picked this is next week, Last Breath is coming out, starring Woody Harrelson, which is based off a documentary that me and Scott have reviewed on this podcast, that we said this would make an amazing movie. It's about this undersea team that is trying to save their colleague who's trapped out in the deeps of the ocean, and he is running out of air. He's in his last breath, and it's a really engaging, thrilling documentary. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this gets turned into a movie. I think it has potential to be really great. But what's an event that you feel has not been turned into a movie yet that would make a great sort of action adventure picture? And if you want me to know, answer that question, you can do it by email at themoviebreakdown@gmail.com. Or you can hop on over at Twitter at themoviebreakdown1. Or you can go over on Facebook. We have a Facebook page there at The Movie Breakdown. And so you can check those out. And also, like I said, if you want my services as a writer, you can also contact me at christopher.d.spicer@gmail.com. I check that email a lot more too, so you could even answer questions there. And follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Helps us grow. We'll put more sort of new things on there, some original posts, if we know that we've got sort of a following there. We can engage with you there. Another way you can help us out is subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast that you listen to us. That could be Spreaker. That could be Spotify. That could be Castbox, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can, listen to us, but also rate and subscribe, because it helps us in the algorithms. It helps us then be seen by more people. And if we're seen by more people, we can grow and create more things for you. As well, as I said before, if you listen to us on the Spreaker app, that would just be all the awesome. And of course, I've got my site, which there is been things posted on here every day this year. Stuff about Murder on the Orient Express and some personal things, a bit about my mental health. But the plan is to really start putting movie reviews on here again and pop culture pieces. So check that out, beyondthebalcony.com. And I will be back here next week. I will finally catch up on 2025 movies. We're a little behind, and one of the movies I plan on reviewing will be Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, and probably a few other things. And I might have a special guest host. I know I said we're not doing guest host yet. I'm going to do solo, but for Wallace and Gromit Vengeance Most Foul, I might have a special guest who, or maybe two, who are very near and dear to my heart. One who's been on this show before, and one who I believe she is making her debut. So you can look forward to that next week. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this podcast that I do admit went a bit longer than I had planned. But I am Christopher Spicer, and I wish you a great week at the movies.